Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere hot. Not just summer in the city hot. Think endless golden dunes, sun-scorched rooftops, and streets where shadows become prized real estate. You're walking through ancient Persia, maybe around 500 BCE. Your sandals are too thin, your tunic is starting to stick. And frankly, you probably won't survive this day without some serious help from people who knew how to chill before fans were a thing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your country and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle your way through a courtyard in the city of Persepolis, squinting at the sun as it blazes overhead like a divine eye that forgot how to blink. The air is shimmering, the stones are too hot to touch, and even the goats look like they've given up. And yet, someone somewhere in this blistering empire had the thought, what if we didn't have to sweat through this? That thought rather heroically gave birth to one of humanity's earliest forays into temperature control. Ancient Persians didn't have electricity, but they had geometry, airflow, intuition, and possibly way too much time to stare at the wind. You duck into a shaded passage between two mud brick buildings. The difference is instant, like walking into a sigh. It's not cold exactly, but it's not trying to cook you alive either. That right there is the beginning of our story. The Achaemenid Empire stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea was a marvel of coordination and ambition, but at its core, often quite literally, was a people obsessed with engineering comfort. Whether they were building underground water highways or chilling in gardens fed by secret springs, Persians were solving the heat problem in ways that still feel futuristic. One of the first things you notice if you know what to look for is how the streets are angled. Not random, not decorative. No, someone charted the prevailing winds and designed alleyways to welcome them. This wasn't just about catching a breeze. It was about setting architectural traps for air, luring it into homes, guiding it through rooms like a welcome guest. In places like Yazd, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth, you start to see the clever layers, thick walls made of mud and straw absorbing heat during the day and releasing it at night. Tiny windows near the ceiling positioned like snipers of coolness. Courtyards filled with plants that do double duty as decor and humidity machines. And then of course you still try not to sweat through your second tunic. As you pass through a public square, a storyteller is reciting the exploits of heroes, though half the crowd looks more interested in the shadows cast by the tent than the tale itself. Someone offers you a cup of sharbat, an ancient ancestor of sorbet made from snow, hauled in from the mountains and mixed with fruit syrup. You pretend to savor it slowly. In truth, you might cry if it melts too fast. Here's the kicker: for all their efforts, historians still argue whether the Persians invented passive cooling first or merely perfected it. Similar techniques show up in Egyptian tombs even earlier. The Indus Valley civilization had water-based systems we're only beginning to understand. But in terms of scale, consistency, and sheer poetry, Persia made heat management an art form. And with that, you reach the edge of a garden, not a European hedge maze or a row of tulips, but a Persian paradise in the literal sense. That word paridaita meant walled enclosure, and it's where our modern word paradise comes from. You step into the shaded sanctuary and feel the temperature dip, as if the plants themselves are exhaling in relief. Now imagine living in a culture that treats coolness like wealth, where a breeze is currency and silence broken only by flowing water, and the rustle of date palms is the sound of luxury. You wouldn't just build for function, you'd build for poetry, for drama. For that exact moment when a dinner guest pauses mid-bite and says, "Wait, is it cooler in here?" You pause too, listening. The wind flutters through a stone grate above your head, and for the first time all day your skin stops buzzing with heat. You realize you're not just in the middle of a city, you're inside a machine, a slow, sandy, sun-drenched machine designed entirely to keep you from melting. It's not flashy, it doesn't hum, it doesn't even have buttons. But as the sun begins to dip and the long shadows stretch across the garden, you get the feeling that you've just met the quiet ancestor of your air conditioner, and frankly, it deserves more credit. You walk deeper into the city just as the sun begins its lazy descent, casting the walls in amber and softening the hard heat of the afternoon. But the wind is what catches your attention now, gentle, oddly directed, and somehow cooler than it has any right to be. You glance up. There it is. A badger. It's not shouting for attention, but the structure stands like an ear listening to the sky. This is no ordinary tower. In fact, it's barely a tower in the usual sense. It's hollow, segmented vertically like a pie cut by a civil engineer, and it's angled perfectly to snatch wind right out of the air. You step under its shadow, tilting your head up to see how it works. The breeze filters in through the openings at the top and gets funneled downward through long vertical shafts. These aren't vents, they're invitations. The air moves with purpose, gliding past internal partitions that control speed and direction. The more you think about it, the more it feels like someone had handcrafted a wind recipe. The earliest examples of these wind catchers may go back 3,000 years. Some believe they were first designed in ancient Egypt, or perhaps the idea traveled via the same trading routes as lapis lazuli and cinnamon. But it was the Persians, especially those clever folks in the arid zones of Yazd and Kerman, who took the idea and made it sing. Stand in a room beneath a functioning badger, and you might forget what month it is. The airflow isn't harsh or artificial. It's like the room is breathing. Architects knew how to combine this wind system with thick insulation and shaded courtyards to make the air inside feel fresh, even slightly perfumed if jasmine was blooming nearby. And they weren't just cooling one room. Some houses had interconnected wind towers positioned at different angles, north, northwest, even southeast, so at least one was catching the breeze no matter the season. Talk about climate control before thermostats were even a gleam in a Roman engineer's eye. Inside the tower shaft, things get more complicated. Some of the smarter towers weren't only pulling in air, they were also pushing it out. That's right, if a room had become too warm, stale air would rise naturally through the tower and vent out. Passive suction. The system cleaned itself. You start to realize this isn't a glorified chimney. It's an atmosphere manager, and it's not just homes. Entire caravanserais inns built for weary travelers crossing the desert featured wind catchers to give camels and humans alike a place to decompress. Imagine trudging across a salty plain. For 3 days your beard full of dust and your sandals melted slightly at the toes, and then stepping into a room where cool air swirls around bowls of grapes. That's not hospitality, it's a miracle. You run your hand along the sun-warmed wall of the tower's base. The surface is thick with sun-fired mud plaster designed not only to withstand centuries, but also to absorb and delay heat transmission. It's architecture that plays the long game. While the day rages, the wall slowly sucks up warmth. Then at night, when temperatures dip, the structure exhales heat back into the cooling desert air. The result, a smoother, gentler cycle of indoor life. Here's a quirky twist: some badgers also worked in reverse. On windless nights, they could draw cool air up from underground storage rooms, pulling it into living quarters above, like flipping the fan setting on your AC from auto to eco without touching anything. It makes you wonder how many modern buildings would benefit from such lazy elegance. And yet, even with all this sophistication, scholars still puzzle over who thought of what first. Some say badgers evolved naturally from chimney smoke vents. Others argue it was a direct response to the qanats, the underground water channels that we'll explore soon. Maybe it was both. Maybe a farmer stood one day in front of a hole and said, "Hey, this is breezy," and an empire was changed forever. You look up and again at the tower. Pigeons perch on the edges, seemingly unbothered by the engineering marvel beneath them. That's the thing about genius, it often arrives quietly, hiding in plain sight, looking like part of the background. A gentle voice nearby chuckles at your awe. An old man sitting beneath the shade of a date palm gestures to the tower with a cracked hand. Wind is clever, he says, but it needs help to find the right door. You smile at the metaphor. It sticks with you as you make your way toward a nearby home that's rumored to have not one, but 4 wind catchers, each catching a different personality of the breeze. Before you reach the courtyard, you feel it, the shift in air, the subtle coolness brushing your skin like the edge of a wet scarf. At some point, you forget to keep sweating. You step barefoot across the threshold of a quiet home in Yazd, and right away the air feels different, not cold, just considerate, like it thought carefully before deciding where to go. The kind of air that's read a few books. It's breezing past your ankles in a slow swirl and drifting upward, whispering around the clay columns like it's trying not to wake the house. Welcome to the part where a wall becomes a fan. You're standing in a room specifically designed to behave like a lung wide at the base tall, toward the back with openings that inhale wind through upper vents and exhale warmer air through strategically placed gaps. The wind catcher or badger above is doing its part, but inside there's something else going on, geometry working overtime. The ceilings stretch upward high and domed. The taller the ceiling, the more room for warm air to rise and vanish into invisible upper layers. It's a game of thermal strategy. Hot air goes up, cool air stays down. No electric fan required. This simple vertical design means your face stays comfortable even as the desert sun keeps hammering outside like it's in a mood. The walls are thick, sometimes nearly a meter wide, and constructed with a blend of mud, straw, and sometimes crushed ceramics. The material isn't just sturdy, it's slow. It absorbs heat like a sluggish sponge, delaying the transfer of the sun's fury for hours. By the time that warmth seeps through, the sun is already packing up for the day. Now here's where it gets even clever. Look closer, and you'll find niches built into the walls, shallow alcoves or decorative indents. They aren't just there to show off pottery. Historians believe they help scatter and diffuse airflow. Rather than letting wind slam into a flat wall and give up these curved edges, redirect it, spreading coolness with elegance. Aesthetics meets function. It's the home equivalent of looking good while handing out popsicles. Below your feet, a channel runs silently under the floor, part of a system that will come into focus later. For now, you just know that the air smells faintly of wet stone and something floral. It's comforting. A little too comforting. You could nap standing up. In the corner, a ceiling vent lets in filtered sunlight through perforated screens. That gentle golden light casts shadows on the plaster, forming geometric patterns that shift as the day ages. These perforated windows or mashrabiyya-style screens do more than charm your eyeballs. They diffuse harsh light and allow controlled air movement. You realize every part of this room is cooperating to keep you from dissolving into a human puddle. One theory posits that wind-catching homes evolved from earlier tent designs with nomads manipulating fabric layers to invite air in while blocking sun. As they settled into cities and traded textiles for baked bricks, they kept that same logic structure should help you breathe. Of course, some scholars still debate whether these principles were developed independently or absorbed through contact with older Mesopotamian or Harappan traditions. It's a kind of academic hot potato. Fitting. You walk toward the back of the room where the ceiling dips lower. This was the sleeping area, shaded from direct sun, placed in line with the wind's most cooperative direction. You lie back on a woven reed mat and stare up at the ceiling's subtle curves. It's oddly aerodynamic. The very space above your head is shaped to keep the air flowing quietly, like a library for breezes. And here's a fringe detail that makes you grin. Some particularly clever homes would hang damp cloth across vents or sprinkle water on the floors to intensify cooling. As air moved across the moisture, it would drop a degree or two, just enough to make you sigh with gratitude. In a climate where summer temps often crack 40 degrees, that's 104 degrees for our Fahrenheit friends, even a small drop meant the difference between existing and dramatically flopping. There's a quiet elegance in how everything in this space cooperates. The walls don't fight the sun, they outlast it. The air doesn't rush, it meanders. The house doesn't cool you like a refrigerator. It seduces the heat, slows it down, and politely asks it to leave. You start to think of modern homes sealed up tight, filled with machines that hum and blow and recirculate. Useful, sure, but also loud, energy hungry, and oddly disconnected from the environment outside. Here you feel aligned, like you're part of the house's nervous system. A child appears in the doorway holding a palm fan, not the kind you use to stir up air desperately, but one with ornate embroidery, clearly ceremonial, but probably still handy when the wind decides to nap. She offers you a date and a quiet smile, then vanishes into another breezy corner of the house. That's the thing in this world, cooling isn't just mechanical. It's cultural. Architectural choices reflect lifestyle, routine, ritual. People wake early, nap midday, dine under starlight. They dress for the wind and sleep near doorways. And their houses are not machines, they're habitats tuned to the rhythms of the sun and sky. You close your eyes. Somewhere above, the badger keeps whispering coolness into the room. Not a whir, not a buzz, just the sound of wind shaped by mudstone and centuries of soft-spoken genius. You wake up to the faint scent of earth, not the smell of dirt after rain, but something deeper, sun-warmed clay, the ghost of last night's breeze and the memory of wet straw drying in the morning heat. The floor beneath you is firm but strangely gentle, and as you sit up, your fingers trace the texture of packed mud, smooth but not cold, solid but never harsh. This is adobe earth turned into shelter, and today it's time to appreciate just how absurdly good it is at beating the heat. The house you're in, humble by some standards, but expertly crafted, is made of sun-dried bricks called kesht. They're not much to look at, dull beige, slightly crumbly at the corners, stacked with the casual patience of someone who's worked with nature for a few lifetimes. But together these bricks create an insulated fortress against the desert's wrath. You walk to the outer wall and place your palm against it. It's warm, yes, but not burning. You remember how the sun was already high by breakfast. This wall has been working for hours, taking heat in slowly like a camel drinking water. That thermal mass is key. It acts like a thermal bank, storing heat during the day and radiating it out after the sun sets, delaying the heat wave, softening the edges. The ceiling is made of wood beams and a thin plaster layer reinforced with straw or even goat hair if someone felt fancy. The beams creak slightly as the house settles into its daily rhythm. You imagine generations walking across this same floor, leaving behind not just footprints but strategies for surviving summer. Outside, you notice the buildings are packed closely together. This isn't just urban crowding. It's tactical. Narrow alleys called kuches wind between homes with tall walls that shade the pathways below. These shaded alleys act like urban arteries, cooling the walking routes and funneling breezes where they're needed most. You take a turn through one and suddenly feel the temperature drop a couple of degrees. Nature's air ducts. Some of these walls even curve slightly at the top, just enough to direct airflow into the space below. Others are painted white to reflect sunlight or covered with clay-washed mosaics to bounce heat away in soft patterned ripples. It's like the whole neighborhood conspired to stay cool, and nobody bothered to tell modern urban planners. You pass a neighbor splashing water onto a small clay platform near his doorway. He waves. For the dust, he says, but you know there's another reason. As the water evaporates, it cools the immediate air, a microclimate trick people have used for thousands of years. Historians still argue whether this technique was an invention of Persia or borrowed from Indian and North African desert communities, but either way, the effect is refreshingly immediate. The quirky twist: some wealthier families embedded crushed seashells into their plaster. It wasn't just decorative, the calcium content reflected light and hardened the surface. Plus, it looked chic. Imagine showing off your pearly white walls to guests and casually mentioning they're also practical. Take that marble countertops. As you return home, you notice the floor plan from above is shaped around a central courtyard. This is the Persian hayat, a kind of open-air heart of the home. In the middle, often a small pool or house ringed by shade trees like pomegranates or figs. The water reflects the sky and, more importantly, amplifies the cooling effect of the wind catchers feeding air through the building. You sit beside it, dipping your toes into the shallow water, and feel the temperature dip again. This isn't accidental. The entire building is cooperating to create a kind of thermal choreography. The thick adobe walls absorb, the shaded courtyard diffuses, the water reflects, the air, ever obedient, meanders through it all, like a guest who knows they're welcome. And beneath all of this, a whisper, literally. You're hearing something soft, like the faintest trickle or a sigh from the earth. It's coming from below the home, something moving underground. But that's for later. For now, you focus on the adobe. Mud, water, straw, sunshine. That's it. No wires, no compressors, no power cords. Just earth turned into a temperature-managing sculpture. The kind of solution you can build with your hands if you've got a bit of time and the patience of a desert farmer. You press your back against the shaded courtyard wall. It's cool, not just not hot, genuinely cool. You smile. There's no breeze at the moment, but somehow this space doesn't feel stuffy. It's like the building has already thought about this and planned accordingly. In our modern world, where comfort often arrives by remote control and costs a small fortune in electricity, this feels like a soft-spoken rebellion. It's not about forcing the air to behave. It's about welcoming it into a partnership. You cool the house and the house cools you back. You close your eyes again. Somewhere in the background, a pigeon flutters past the edge of the rooftop. A child's laugh echoes faintly through a shaded alley. The bricks around you, sun-dried, unpretentious, immortal, hold the heat at bay just a little longer. You rise slowly from your shaded nook in the courtyard, feeling the last traces of sleep evaporate with the morning dew. The air remains gentle. Thank the adobe, but you can sense the heat building again, inching closer, like a lion yawning in the distance. So naturally, it's the perfect time to visit. An ice house. Yes, ice. In the desert. You're led by a cheerful boy carrying a basket of dried limes. He hums as he walks, occasionally tossing one lime in the air and catching it behind his back with unnecessary flair. You follow him through narrow alleys until the city gives way to open sand, and there it is, a giant dome, like a beehive mated with a ziggurat. This is a yakocho, literally ice pit. It doesn't look cold, it doesn't look anything like a refrigerator. But once again, Persia has pulled off a minor miracle: actual ice in the middle of a desert where July can feel like being roasted inside a clay pot. You step into its shade and your skin reacts before your mind does. The air around the base of the dome is significantly cooler, and it only drops further as you descend a narrow ramp into the structure's belly. The floor is deep sunken below ground level, and the walls curve inward like a spiral. You breathe in, and it smells faintly of dust, old stone, and impossibly wetness. Inside the yakchal, the temperature remains remarkably steady, not cold like a winter storm, but certainly not the scalding dry heat just outside the wall. It's cool enough to store food, preserve ice, and keep you from melting into your sandals. So, how did it work? The construction itself is a marvel. The dome is made of thick, heat-resistant mud bricks mixed with special materials like camel hair and ash to improve insulation. Underneath the storage pit is lined with a type of mortar so waterproof that even now, centuries later, it holds up against moisture. But that's just the passive part. What's really clever is how the Persians made the ice. In winter months, shallow pools called ice basins were dug next to the dome. Overnight, with the desert's dramatic temperature swings, water would freeze, especially when shaded by tall walls that blocked daytime sunlight. Workers would collect the ice at dawn, cut it into manageable blocks, and lower it into the dome where it could be stacked and insulated with straw or sawdust. All this effort just to store ice. And yet it worked. The city of Yazd alone had dozens of these domes. Some families even shared ownership, pooling resources to maintain a communal freezer of sorts. Imagine it, your neighbor's uncle climbs down at noon to grab a chunk of ice, and later you're sipping cold douche, a yogurt and mint drink as the sun melts the rest of your afternoon. Now here's the quirky part. The Yakchal was more than a storage unit. It doubled as a social landmark. In some seasons, it served as the backdrop for small gatherings, ritual events, or moments when children snuck around its perimeter playing games they probably weren't supposed to. If there were a Persian version of King of the Hill, this was the hill. Historians still argue whether Persia's yakachos were purely homegrown innovations or adapted from older Mesopotamian cooling methods. Some point to Babylonian ice pits as possible predecessors. Others insist the scale and technical finesse of Persian domes set them apart. Either way, what's certain is the level of sophistication. And it wasn't just about ice. These domes were tied into wider networks of qanats, those underground water channels we'll dive into soon, which helped cool the surrounding soil and regulate temperatures inside the structure. It was like the whole region was participating in a quiet war against heat. You run your hand along the inner wall. It's strangely dry. Even with ice stored below, the design keeps condensation minimal. That special plaster known locally as sarouj was a mix of clay, lime, goat hair, ash, and egg whites. No, really. Egg whites. Apparently chickens also contributed to early refrigeration. One dome you visit has a small inscription carved near the top. A date faded by time and a short prayer for continued coolness. It makes you smile. You imagine the builder arms dusted with clay wiping sweat from his brow and muttering, "Please let it not melt this year." Of course there were failures. One traveler's journal mentions a local catastrophe. A broken seal on the dome caused water to flood the ice pit. Another year, a sandstorm knocked over an entire outer wall, spoiling months of hard work. And once in a while, thieves, yes, literal ice thieves, would try to sneak in and steal frozen slabs in the night. Imagine explaining that to your village elder. "Sorry, I missed prayers. I was chasing someone down the alley with a half-melted block of contraband snow." Still, the Yakchal prevailed. Quiet, domed, unassuming. It stood there year after year, proving that you could make luxury from nothing but mud, winter air, and cleverness. And as you step back outside into the growing heat of mid-morning, you appreciate it all the more. Because now you're sweating again. You're sweating again, but this time there's a plan. A very old plan. One that involves water, darkness, gravity, and a network so quiet it makes modern plumbing look like a garage band. You follow a guide, a woman with a linen scarf wrapped loosely around her head and a clay lantern in hand, as she leads you through a narrow passage beside the Yakcha. The air begins to change, drier, cooler, more purposeful. Soon you're standing at the mouth of a sloping tunnel. She gestures inside. "Qanat," she says simply, water that thinks it's air. You duck into the tunnel, careful not to bump your head. The space narrows, the light dims, and your footsteps echo softly. The floor slopes downward gently, and with every step the air gets cooler. You realize the ground above is sun-baked, probably searing by now. Yet down here a natural chill hugs your arms. Qanats are one of Persia's most brilliant contributions to civil engineering. At first glance, they're simple, gently sloped tunnels dug underground to transport water from higher elevations where the water table is accessible down to dry, thirsty plains. But as you walk deeper, you start to appreciate the insane logistics involved. We're talking miles, sometimes dozens of miles of tunnel, hand dug through desert stone maintained by generations of workers who knew that a slight deviation in slope could flood a village or leave crops parched. And yet they managed, for centuries, without GPS, without backhoes, and without melting in frustration. The tunnel flattens out now, and up ahead you hear the trickle of running water. It's soft, almost timid, like a polite stream sneaking past your feet. The guide lets you kneel beside it. You dip your fingers in cold, not just cool, mountain spring cold. This water started its journey maybe 20 miles away from a source buried under gravel and rock, and has traveled underground like a courier of calm. Here's the kicker. Qanats didn't just move water. They cooled it, and by extension cooled the structures they passed under. Homes, bathhouses, storage rooms, even mosques were sometimes built directly above the flow. The moving water acted like a living coolant, sucking heat out of the surrounding earth and breathing moisture into the dry air above. In especially clever homes, people routed air from badgers down into chambers where the wind would cross over Qanat tunnel, chill itself, and rise back up into the room like it just came back from a spa weekend. You start to see how wind and water weren't separate systems. They were dance partners, and the choreography was exquisite. You pass a maintenance shaft, one of the vertical wells that dot the landscape like polite molehills. These vertical shafts allowed ancient builders to measure slope, remove dirt, and access sections of the tunnel for cleaning. From above, they looked deceptively boring. From below, they're lifelines. A few shafts even had small pulleys to lower repairmen, usually teenage apprentices who hadn't developed full-blown claustrophobia yet. Historians still argue whether Qanats originated in Persia or whether the technology spread there from earlier civilizations like the Assyrians. Some say similar systems existed in Egypt and even Peru, but Persia seems to have mastered the concept, expanding it across an empire where water was both sacred and scarce. You turn a corner and enter a domed chamber, an underground sardab or cool cellar. These were common in wealthier homes and often built directly over the Qanat's flow. You breathe in. The temperature has dropped significantly, maybe 10 or 15 degrees compared to the street above. You could store food here. You could nap here. You might never leave. Your guide explains that some sardabs had small basins that allowed water to rise into view. Not the fountains, more like observation windows into the lifeblood of the house. You could dip your cup in or just sit beside it watching ripples glide across the surface as though the water were dreaming. And here's a fringe detail you love. In some cases, Qanat water also powered small mechanical devices like early water clocks or musical instruments. Imagine a home where time is measured by trickling water and the soft whistle of wind. Modern smart homes could never. But of course, not everything was flawless. Qanats were high maintenance, collapses happened, wells had to be cleared. In dry years, water levels dipped so low that entire tunnels had to be extended uphill. It was an eternal balancing act, and while many systems survived for over 1,000 years, others faded away as cities modernized. Even today, debates continue over the sustainability of restoring Qanats versus building new reservoirs. One engineer insists the ancient slopes are still more efficient than modern pumps. Another argues that too many tunnels have collapsed or been encroached upon by urban sprawl. The water once free-flowing is now trapped under layers of concrete and bureaucracy. But in this moment underground, you don't care about politics. You just care about the breeze. Yes, you feel it again. A whisper of airflow coming down from some unseen shaft brushing against the running water and curling upward toward the homes above. If you close your eyes, it could be a lullaby, earth breathing. You sit for a moment longer, hands in your lap, mind slowed to match the gentle current beside you. Wind and water, air and earth, a climate system that predates your AC unit by a couple of millennia and somehow still works without a single beep. And the best part, you haven't heard a fan motor all day. When you finally emerge from the cool underground quiet of the Kanat, the sun greets you like a golden oven door swinging open. Your eyes squint, your shoulders tense. But then you're led mercifully into another courtyard. This time the breeze is not just comforting. It smells like cucumbers and mint. It's lunchtime. Welcome to the ancient Persian dining experience where the desert heat isn't something to suffer through. It's something to outsmart. You sit cross-legged on a wide cotton rug in the shade of a fig tree. To your left is a long, shallow trough carved into stone and water. From the Kanab bubbles through it lazily. Small clay cups float gently in the stream like boats on vacation. A bowl is placed in front of you, earthenware heavy and blessedly cold to the touch. Inside is mast okiar, a yogurt and cucumber dish, so chilled, so herbal it might actually make you fall asleep mid-bite. You take a spoonful. The cool tang of yogurt gives way to the crunch of cucumber, followed by a whisper of dried mint and rose petals. Somewhere in the distance, a bird is singing a single note, as if it too has been sedated by dairy. The family you're visiting sits nearby, chatting in soft tones. A breeze filters through a nearby badger and glides across the table. You realize now this isn't just good food, this is curated temperature. The location, the seating, the ceramic materials. Everything was designed to keep you comfortable long enough to chew and reflect without needing a napkin for your forehead. Even the plates are part of the system. Glazed clay bowls are naturally insulating. Copper trays reflect heat but lose it fast. And the food, it's served at room temperature or chilled. Hot soup in summer not here. Unless you want to pass out in your lentils. You sip from a cup of sharbat, a lightly sweetened syrup, drink made from steeped herbs and fruit. This one tastes like sour cherry and basil. It's served over snow, yes, snow hauled in from the distant mountains before dawn, and stored in the family's shared yak chal. You crunch the ice delicately between your teeth, and wonder if anything in your freezer has ever tasted this poetic. And then there's the bread. Lavash, still soft and slightly warmed from the morning bake, is fanned briefly before serving to cool it down. You notice one of the children waving it over a basin of cool water, not to wet it, but to draw the air's chill upward. It's a small ritual, barely a motion, but it makes all the difference. Here's a delightful tidbit. Some wealthier households would hang damp cloth strips along shaded entryways, so that breezes passing through would be slightly cooled and humidified. Guests would walk through what was essentially a scented air curtain before sitting down to eat. Imagine being lightly misted with rosewater before dinner. Beats a paper towel, doesn't it? As you watch the family pass plates and fan one another gently between bites, a theory floats into your mind. Maybe the Persian approach to food wasn't just about taste, it was about temperature regulation. A whole cuisine evolved not just for flavor, but for thermal harmony. Cold eggplant with garlic and mint, pickled vegetables steeped in vinegar and spices, fresh herbs laid out in bunches like bouquets, yogurt in every form, drinkable, dippable spoon like soup, or spread like butter, all of it built to cool you down from the inside out. Historians still debate whether this culinary focus was driven by climate or culture, but maybe here, those are the same thing. The conversation shifts. Someone tells a joke. Another person claps politely. Even the laughter is soft. Nobody raises their voice. There's no need. The space is acoustically gentle. No sharp echoes. The heat dulls the urgency of speech and amplifies the quiet pleasures of food shade and the occasional light breeze tickling the back of your neck. Someone brings out fresh melon slices, cold again, almost suspiciously so. You learn later that they were lowered into the Qanat stream that morning, wrapped in a damp cloth and pulled out just before lunch. The melon tastes like it forgot what the sun was. You take another bite and nearly forget your own name. A dog lies sprawled in the corner, tongue lolling, belly rising and falling with long, lazy breaths. You envy him, a fringed detail you pick up from a nearby elder in some homes. They would bury clay amphorae of water overnight, so the earth could cool them, then set them on shaded tables during meals to create small oases of chill. Guests would instinctively lean toward them without thinking. It was like having a personal climate bubble made from dirt, water, and strategy. You recline slightly, hand cradling your cold cup. The wind shifts again barely, but the air seems to glide over the courtyard basin and carry the smell of mint and damp stone to your nostrils. You close your eyes, no buzzing, no whirring, just breathing yours the winds and the subtle gurgle of the Qanat running below. This is dining in ancient Persia, not just a meal, a coordinated performance of stone water shadow and silence, designed not just to fill your belly but to regulate your entire being. And as someone refills your sharbat, still cold, still impossibly refreshing, you realize this may be the most delicious air conditioning you've ever tasted. After that ice-kissed lunch, you imagine doing something productive, maybe helping in the garden or translating an ancient tablet or inventing algebra. But no, the body has other plans. Specifically, the plan is lie down immediately and pretend you're melting into the tile. And that's exactly what everyone else seems to be doing. Welcome to the afternoon rhythm of ancient Persia, where even the bathhouses are built to ease the body, not shock it awake. You're led quietly down another cool alleyway, one where the air smells faintly of lime and old plaster. Ahead is a domed building with small star-shaped openings in the roof. Light spills in like constellations. The floor tiles gleam. You remove your sandals, step through the stone arch, and immediately feel the hush. This is the hammam, the Persian bathhouse. But you're not here for steam or scrubbing. Today's bath is a tepidarium kind of affair. Lukewarm water, calm voices, low lighting. The kind of atmosphere where your bones release tension you didn't know they were hoarding. The room is warmer than the sardab you visited earlier, but it's also beautifully ventilated. Small wall vents lead to an underground airflow system, likely tied to a nearby Qanat. Cool air is pulled through low in the chamber, pushed upward naturally by the gentle heat of the bathwater. It's convection with manners, no rush, no fan noise, just slowly circulating calm. You strip down to a linen wrap and ease into the shallow pool at the center. The water is skin temperature, perfectly unremarkable, which makes it exquisite. Around the edge, tiled seating allows bathers to recline while sipping mint tea or dozing lightly. A young attendant offers you a handful of rose petals. You raise an eyebrow, but they gesture toward the water. Ah, of course. Even the scent is choreographed. It might surprise you to learn that these baths weren't always steamy. Unlike the Roman obsession with sauna-like temperatures, many Persian hammams were built to soothe rather than purge. Tepid water, ambient airflow, and filtered light created a space for rest, conversation, and daydreaming, especially during peak heat hours. In older records, there are mentions of baths divided by gender and age, with elder men often holding court in the late afternoons, doling out casual wisdom while gently exfoliating with clay. You should never trust a goat with a full beard, one says. No one questions him. And here's the kicker. Some of these bathhouses were self-cooling. That's right. Through a combination of badgers, shaded domes, and evaporative cooling systems, remember those damp cloths, the air inside was carefully managed to stay a few degrees cooler than the brutal temperatures outside. Some scholars debate whether these methods were borrowed from Greek Asclepians or evolved entirely locally. The domes, the airflow, the hypocaust-style heating systems for colder seasons all point to a shared architectural conversation stretching from Rome to India. But the tone of the Persian bathhouse feels sleepier, less about health, more about not overheating your soul. A fringe detail certain hammams had built-in sleeping chambers, small nooks with cool stone benches and thick curtains where bathers could rest between sessions. Imagine dozing off, wrapped in a damp linen sheet, with the distant trickle of a fountain and the scent of sandalwood drifting through the air. That's not just pampering, that's survival with style. You step out of the water and pad across the smooth tiles to a bench beneath one of the star-shaped skylights. From here you can see the tiny motes of dust dancing like lazy fireflies in the golden beam. The room is mostly silent except for an occasional yawn or the sound of someone refilling a clay pitcher. In one corner, two women sit brushing each other's hair, a rhythmic, meditative gesture passed down through generations. In another, a boy naps with his feet resting in a cool ceramic bowl, one hand still gripping a half-eaten date. This isn't a spa day, it's daily life. Cooling down wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity engineered into the routine of everything, including hygiene. And while modern bathhouses use jets, thermostats, and bubbling pumps, this one runs on sun placement thermal gradients and carefully placed holes in the ceiling. You lie back and close your eyes. The tile under you is not cold, but it remembers being cool. It holds just enough resistance to the heat to keep you comfortable. Somewhere above, the wind catcher sends another hush of air through the room, like a sigh from an ancient stone god. There's no rush here, no alarms, just a collective agreement to slow down while the sun burns overhead. It's one of those quiet truths about ancient Persian life. They didn't fight the environment, they collaborated with it. And just as your thoughts begin to dissolve into the background hum of the room, someone hands you a dry towel warmed by the air and gently ushers you back into the courtyard sunlight. But don't worry, you're not going far. You're not going far indeed. Just a short walk from the hammam through a shaded archway and under a series of low vine-draped trellises, and suddenly you're somewhere altogether grander. Cooler, yes, but also quieter, more fragrant, and distinctly regal. You've stepped into the domain of royalty, not the sort of palace that screams wealth with gold-plated fountains or peacock parades. No, this is ancient Persian elegance, understated, composed, and precisely engineered to let kings and queens sweat a little less than the rest of us. You're standing in a royal estate, perhaps part of the vast grounds near Pasargadae, or later in Isfahan. The palace walls rise in smooth, pale stone, framed by wooden beams that seem to sigh with the weight of the afternoon sun. But even as the light blazes beyond the courtyards here inside, the air is strangely forgiving. That's by design. The first thing you notice above the silence, above the architecture, is the scent. Jasmine, rosewater, cypress, and cold stone. These aren't just decorative choices. These plants are part of the palace's microclimate strategy. High walls provide shade, but the moisture from irrigated garden beds and bubbling pools gives the air a silky softness. You run your fingers along the edge of one such pool, cool again, and perfectly still save for the occasional plop of a falling fig. Above your head, a massive wind tower rises, but this one is almost hidden among decorative minarets and carved pillars. It channels the breeze like all the others you've encountered, but here it enters the rooms after first being passed through underground channels and over cool water. This added journey makes it feel like the air has manners. It doesn't rush in, it glides. Inside the royal chambers, you pass through a series of rooms built in a linear sequence. This isn't just for drama. The layout gradually filters and cools the air, each room acting as a buffer against the heat beyond. Some halls have water features running right down the center, narrow canals lined with polished stones fed by hidden qanats. You bend down to inspect the surface. The water reflects your face with the soft shimmer of a dream. And here comes a fun little fringe fact: in some of these royal homes, small jets of water would shoot upward from clay nozzles like early air fresheners. They were powered by gravity-fed pressure systems connected to rooftop cisterns. You're essentially watching ancient hydraulic artistry. Bonus: the mist cooled the skin without soaking the robes. Royal efficiency. The walls here are thick and made of fired brick coated with a lime plaster that resists both sun and gossip. You trace a finger along the carvings near a doorway. Delicate vines, miniature cypress trees, and the occasional griffin, because even kings liked a touch of mythological flair. Historians still debate which king built the most climate-conscious palace. Some point to Cyrus the Great's famed gardens, the original Peri Desa, a paradise enclosed not only by walls, but by design principles that made the unbearable livable. Others argue that Darius I's additions to Persepolis included innovations in thermal regulation. And of course, there's always that one professor who insists the real genius was some unnamed architect who simply understood what the wind wanted. You pause beneath a canopy woven from date palm fibers. Above delicate fabrics hang like banners, some linen, some dyed silk. These textiles aren't for show. They filter light and slightly diffuse the heat, creating shadow play across the tiled floor. A servant walks past, bare feet, silent, and adjusts a curtain that's fluttering too enthusiastically. You wonder how many royal hands have waved lazily at the same breeze. Lunch for royalty is finished now, and most of the court has disappeared into their own alcoves, sleeping off figs and diplomacy. You tiptoe past an open room where cushions are piled high and windows are latticed with wooden screens called panjara. These intricate carvings let in air while keeping sunlight at bay. The geometric patterns aren't just aesthetic, they're functional filters. You move closer and realize the light itself has become a design. In one corner of the complex, a quiet library rests beneath a pair of wind towers. You step inside. Scrolls line the walls. Even paper needs a stable temperature, and here, with the ambient breeze and shadowed floors, you could almost mistake the room for a mountain cave. Except the cave has an annotated copy of Zoroastrian hymns and a surprisingly sassy poem about heat stroke. And here's something charming. In some court documents, there's mention of seasonal architecture, summer rooms built for airflow and light, and winter rooms built lower, tighter, with small fireplaces. The entire palace rotated around climate. No thermostats needed, just a deep understanding of time, space, and breeze. You sit in one of the gardens, now your legs stretched out beside a channel of water, just wide enough for your hand. The air above it is 10 degrees cooler than the path you walked in on. The cypress trees sway gently, and above them, the palace seems to breathe, opening its windows and vents like lungs exhaling warmth, inhaling wind. It's not magic, it's math, geometry, physics, and centuries of trial and error. But to you seated there, in the shade of a royal estate, a chilled fig in one hand, and the quiet hum of water nearby, it sure feels magical. The palace fades behind you as you wander into the heart of the city. It's the part of town that never quite stops moving the bazaar. But don't worry, this isn't a modern market with fluorescent lights and screeching vendor speakers. No, this bazaar hums at a different pace, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. The first thing you notice is the shade. It's deep, almost theatrical. You glance up and realize why the rooftops of the bazaar are curved and staggered with small angled openings called chekampas, literally belly cooked. These dome ceilings trap the rising hot air and vent it upward through cleverly placed slits. The design creates a natural chimney effect, drawing in cooler air from the ground level and letting the sun do all the exhausting work of moving it. You step into the main corridor and the air is surprisingly comfortable. cooler than the sun-blasted courtyard outside despite the press of people. Cloth canopies stretch overhead in places where the permanent roof yields to light, and they sway with every passing gust like lazy sails on a docked ship. Occasionally a shopkeeper tosses a bucket of water onto the stone walkway, accidentally splashing a few customers. No one complains. You pause at a stall selling dried herbs. Bundles of mint, thyme, lavender, and something you can't name hang from the eaves. The smell is like walking into a gentle sneeze in a good way. You smile as a merchant plucks a sprig of basil and waves it in front of a small fan made from reeds. The scent carries straight to you, marketing the ancient way. Around the corner, a woman sits beneath a latticework vent stitching embroidery by hand. The breeze drifts in from a vent carved into the outer wall, funneled by a series of angled stones called sarband. You realize the entire bazaar is working like a passive lung, pulling in air from cool underground channels and letting it swirl through alleys lined with clay, stone, and textile. This is more than architecture, it's choreography. The hot air rises, the cool air sneaks in, the fabric breathes. The people, meanwhile, take their time. There's no rush here. Heat is a known quantity, and the people have developed rituals to dance around it. Now you're watching a fruit seller slice into a watermelon that looks suspiciously frosty. You raise an eyebrow. He points to the back of his stall. There, hidden behind a curtain, is a shallow clay pit, lined with smooth stones and filled with slow-moving water. A mini ice box. Fruits are stored inside porous jars called zirs, which wick moisture and keep the contents cool through simple evaporation. No humming, no plug, just clay and patience. And here's the delightful part. If you're a regular customer, they might let you lean in and rest your wrists against the zir for a few seconds. It's the ancient Persian equivalent of sticking your head in the freezer and whispering, "I just need a moment." You keep walking, admiring how the vendors have adapted. The spice seller places his strongest scents near air vents so they waft out into the crowd. The jeweler keeps a damp cloth over his display to keep it from overheating. And the textile stall, it's set near one of the bazaar's central pools, reflecting light upward, so even the threads shimmer gently. Historians still argue whether Persian bazaars were designed from the ground up with passive cooling in mind, or if it was a gradual evolution. Some scholars point to early Greek and Roman markets with similar ventilation techniques. Others insist the sheer length and complexity of Persian market corridors, with their directional venting, staggered roofs, and built-in water systems, suggest intentional climate planning from the start. You believe the latter, you're standing in it after all, and you're not sweating. In a shaded alcove, you sit for a moment with a glass of kaki shira drink made from basil seeds and rose water served chilled with a spoon. The texture is weird, slippery, but the taste is calm. As you sip, a young boy comes by selling chilled towels for the neck, small cloths soaked in rose water and kept cool inside a ceramic jar. He presses one gently to your hand. You buy two. A fringe detail in especially fancy shopkeepers would train pigeons to flutter gently overhead, not for delivery, but to circulate the air. The wings work better than fans, one old merchant tells you, as if that's perfectly normal. You think about the logistics of installing a dozen airborne air conditioners in a modern mall and decide pigeons may have had a better union. You wander deeper into the bazaar through a section selling carpets. You expect heat here will dye heavy materials, but the air is still pleasant. Skylights let in angled rays of sun bouncing off pale stone tiles. The walls absorb very little heat. One artisan explains that they hang damp blankets behind the back curtains during summer, letting air pass through and carry the coolness forward. And there's always the breeze, just enough to stir the hair on your arms. It's not a gale, not even a gust, just a breeze that understands boundaries. You sit again this time on a pile of cushions near a ceramicist's stall. You're surrounded by color, smell, motion, and yet it's calm. That's the real luxury of this ancient marketplace. It doesn't fight the heat. It turns it into background noise, something manageable, something you can sip tea through. And as a merchant passes with a stack of apricots nestled in chilled leaves, you realize the bazaar isn't just a place of commerce. It's a temple to temperature. You linger for a while longer in the soft bustle of the bazaar, letting the breeze chase you gently from stall to stall. But eventually, inevitably, the day thickens. The sun climbs past its merciful angle and lands directly above you, flexing its midday muscles. The wind gone, hiding, taking a personal day. And suddenly the bazaar starts to change. Shops that were open and chatty just an hour ago now pull down their cloth awnings. Merchants sit a little deeper in the shadows. Children are collected from play and shooed indoors. The rhythm doesn't stop, it slows. Persia isn't built to resist the heat at its peak. It bows to it, gracefully. Welcome to the moment when the wind disappears. You step into the courtyard of a modest home. The air is still, not quite oppressive but heavy, like it's considering something and doesn't want to be rushed. You wipe your brow, the breeze that danced across your arms earlier, gone. Even the pigeons look annoyed, but this isn't a disaster. It's an opportunity for backup systems. You follow a homeowner into the house. She doesn't seem worried. She opens an inner door, leads you through a short hallway, and there it is, the sardab, the cool cellar. You descend a few shallow steps into a room that's half below ground, thick-walled, windowless. The air here feels stored as if it's been waiting for you. It's 5 or 6 degrees cooler than the rest of the house, and during a dead still afternoon, that's the difference between conversation and crankiness. A bowl of pomegranates sits on a low table, their skin slightly dewy. You reach for one and it's cool to the touch. The woman smiles. From under the water, she says, gesturing to the Qanat channel that runs beneath the stone floor. It's shallow, nearly silent, but you can hear the faint gurgle of movement. The room is designed to let that underground coolness seep up through the stone. No moving parts, no clicks, just good planning and cold fruit. You lie back on a woven mat head tilted toward a ceiling vent. This vent isn't connected to a badger. There's no breeze today, but it serves as a pressure release, letting warm air drift upward if and when it decides to move. It's a system designed for patience, not performance. And here's the thing, every part of the house works together. The doors are thick wood, the windows covered with latticework and damp cloth. The walls 3 feet wide at the base breathe slowly. The courtyard above has been doused with water, darkening the tiles and creating little islands of evaporative calm. Even the cats are strategically positioned next to clay pots of cooling water. You chuckle at one fringe detail. The woman shows you a miniature breeze trap on the rooftop. It's a small ceramic sculpture shaped like a funnel, designed not for function, but for hope. Sometimes the wind returns if you ask politely, she says, deadpan. You can't tell if she's joking. You kind of hope she's not. Historians still debate how often these passive systems failed. Written records don't say exactly, but archaeological surveys suggest most homes had fallback designs, like the sardab, meaning people didn't depend on wind alone. They knew the breeze had moods, and in a culture where weather was unpredictable, contingency was baked into every brick. And then it happens. You feel it first on your cheek, a faint ghostly nudge, not enough to lift a leaf, but enough to make the woman glance up from her bowl of herbs. She's back, she says, simply standing to open a higher window. A few moments later, a second puff, then another, like someone exhaling gently through the keyhole of a door. Within minutes, the temperature seems to shift, not drop dramatically, but loosen. The stillness gives way to motion. And once motion starts, the house responds. You can hear the architecture doing its thing, air moving through vents, warm pockets rising, cool patches descending. The silent orchestra picks up where it left off. Outside, fabric curtains begin to twitch. A chime jingles lazily. The pigeons look interested again. Here's a subtle genius move. The house isn't reacting, it's ready. All its systems were just waiting for the air to come back. And because no electricity is needed, there's no power on. It's automatic, like a desert blooming after one good rain. You walk back out into the courtyard and feel the breeze hit your neck. It's like someone turned the whole sky back on. You exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. And that more than anything defines Persian architecture resilience through readiness. Systems built to adapt, to pause, and to gently restart when nature is in the mood again. You find a seat beside a fig tree, watching its leaves tremble ever so slightly. The sun is still blazing, but the city's subtle magic is in motion again. No one panics when the wind leaves. They just wait. With pomegranates, you linger under the fig tree a little longer, your feet propped on the cool edge of the courtyard basin, the breeze now more reliable like a guest who's remembered your name. But your next stop isn't a palace or a market or a shaded home. It's something quieter, older, holier. A Zoroastrian fire temple. You're led along a stone path winding through a dusty hillside, the late afternoon light turning everything gold and soft. Ahead, you see a modest structure more humble than you expected for a house of divine flame. But that's the thing about fire temples, they're about the unseen, the eternal, not the flashy. This particular one is nestled near Yazd, where the air is dry and the hills whisper with ancient prayers. And you're not visiting just one temple today, you're comparing two, because even sacred architecture had to reckon with the Persian sun. The first temple is compact. Its outer walls are thick, almost fortress-like and windowless. Inside, a small fire crackles tended by a white-robed priest who barely glances up as you enter. The flame is real alive, but the air is what captures your attention. Cool, not freezing, not mystical, just calmly, observantly cool. The room's only ventilation comes from small, round openings in the upper walls too high for sunlight to enter directly, but just enough to allow warm air to rise out slowly. This temple doesn't want the wind to rush in. It wants the air to meditate. The stillness isn't stagnant, it's thoughtful. You step closer to the fire altar. A ring of polished stone surrounds it, forming a temperature buffer. It's said that fire in Zoroastrianism must be clean, not just physically, but spiritually. That includes the air around it. The cooling systems here aren't about comfort, they're about reverence. Some scholars argue that this passive cooling was essential to maintaining the sanctity of the flame, preventing smoke buildup or fluctuations that might dishonor its consistency. Others claim the design was more about the priest's comfort during hours-long rituals. The debate lingers like incense. No one's really arguing, but everyone has an opinion. Then you visit the second temple. It's larger, newer, with wider courtyards and more decorative brickwork. The design is different, not just in scale, but in philosophy. This temple doesn't just accommodate the climate, it celebrates it. Tall arches open to the air, shaded by wide eaves. Water basins sit at strategic corners, catching breezes and releasing evaporative coolness into surrounding chambers. The fire is still central, still sacred, but the room breathes more freely here. You sit for a moment near a lattice-covered vent, feeling the difference. In this temple, the badger is subtle, carved into the dome above the altar, and angled so it won't disturb the flame, but will guide warm air away like a silent usher. You're told that on particularly hot days, they sprinkle water on the altar floor, not to cool the fire, but to help the air around it remain calm and steady. Here's a fringe detail that makes you blink. In some rural fire temples, caretakers would place potted plants, basil, mint, even aloe around the edges of the sacred space. These weren't just decorative, they were temperature and humidity regulators, essentially holy house plants. And then there's the sound. In the first temple, it was quiet, heavy, sacred silence. In the second, it's light. You hear the wind fluttering through carved vents, the soft glug of water moving through an underground channel, the creak of old wood stretching in the afternoon warmth. This temple was built not just for stillness, but for flow. You walk through the courtyard admiring the interplay of light and breeze. Everything here works on gradients, temperature gradients, light gradients. Even the sacredness seems to shift softly from stone to air to fire and back again. A priest approaches smiling, with the kind of calm you'd expect from someone who's spent their whole life surrounded by gently whispering architecture. He hands you a cup of chilled water, drawn from a cistern kept cool by underground shade, and points to the horizon, where the hills blur into dust. You see how the temple breathes, he says, motioning upward to the vented dome. So we can breathe with it. It's not metaphorical. He means it literally. These fire temples, old and new, are alive with thermal intelligence. They're not sealed chambers or artificially chilled spaces. They're tuned instruments designed to harmonize with the day, the season, the spirit. Historians still debate whether the early Zoroastrian builders designed these structures entirely around heat management, or whether the climate-adaptive features evolved gradually. But one thing's clear, the result is a sacred space where neither worshippers nor flame are asked to sweat unnecessarily. You walk once more around the inner chamber. The fire is low, steady, quietly insistent, and you feel it how the air around it seems to slow your heartbeat, settle your bones. That's the magic of cooling architecture with a higher purpose, not just comfort, clarity. You step outside into the lowering sun, the breeze now steady and smooth, and glance back at the temple. One built like a cave of stillness, the other a cathedral of flow, both wise, both cool in more ways than one. You leave the temple grounds with your thoughts as quiet as the fire you've just visited. The breeze walks alongside you again, no longer tentative. It seems to trust you now, or maybe you've simply learned how to move with it slower, less urgently. You are after all cooling down in every sense, but now the story travels literally. You're boarding a camel caravan heading westward. Not a real one, mind you. You're in a soft seat made of imagination and embroidered saddlecloth, rocking gently as the landscape unfolds. You're tracing the movement of an idea, the Persian wind catcher. It didn't stay put. Just like water, just like language, just like the scent of cinnamon, the badger traveled. And as it moved, it morphed, adopted new shapes, took on new names, found new skies to catch. Historians and architectural detectives have traced variations of Persian cooling systems across vast swaths of territory, from the Arabian Peninsula to North Africa, into India, and even across the Mediterranean into Europe. In many of these places, the badger was both borrowed and reimagined. Take Egypt, for example. You stop for a moment in Cairo, the breeze now warmer, dustier, but still clever. In the medieval houses of Islamic Cairo malkofs, essentially wine catchers by another name, sprouted from rooftops like periscopes. They shared the same Persian DNA, vertical towers, angled vents, narrow shafts that funneled cool air down into the home. They even paired with inner courtyards and underground cisterns to maximize the chill. Then there's the Arabian Peninsula, especially in cities like Dubai and Bastakia, where the wind towers became iconic. Tall, square, slightly more decorative, but functionally the same. Catch the breeze, direct it, cool the people. The Gulf climate was harsher, the wind saltier, but the principle endured. You ride further still, mentally at least, and find yourself in Pakistan, where in desert cities like Multan, old homes still feature badger-like elements disguised behind plasterwork. In India, elements of this cooling legacy merge with Mughal design, large domes, cross-ventilated pavilions, and clever uses of water features to drop local temperatures. A Delhi courtyard with a star-shaped pool is a cousin to a Yazd courtyard, just wearing different jewelry. And then you reach Europe. It's here the path gets fuzzier. Some scholars argue that during the Crusades, or perhaps even earlier via trade with the Islamic world, knowledge of wind-catching architecture filtered into the Mediterranean. There's evidence, though disputed, of southern Spanish homes in Andalusia using angled air vents that may have been influenced by North African badgers. Whether through conquest, commerce, or cultural osmosis, the concept found root. By the 18th century, European colonialists were building replicas of wind towers in places like colonial India and the Middle East, sometimes purely decorative, sometimes functionally misunderstood. The original wisdom was often filtered through Western aesthetic lenses, where it became charming Eastern design rather than respected thermal engineering. But not all was lost in translation. In southern France, Italy, and Greece, architects began to re-embrace thick walls, high ceilings, and strategic airflow in a style that, while not identical, carried that old Persian spirit build with the heat not against it. And here's a deliciously quirky detail in 19th century Paris. An engineer named Charles B. Lemoyne filed a patent for a ventilating shaft inspired by Moorish architecture. The diagram suspiciously similar to badgers, the patent largely ignored. The idea, still haunting the rooftops of a few forgotten buildings in Montmartre. You chuckle softly. So much knowledge lost, borrowed, reclaimed. It's like the wind itself, you don't always know where it's coming from, but if you build the right tower, you can still catch it. Your imaginary camel rocks gently again, and you look toward the sea. Even modern cities are catching on. Passive cooling systems inspired by badgers are making a comeback. Green architecture projects in the UAE, Iran, and parts of Southern California are embracing the concept. Some universities in the UK have even installed experimental wind towers on campus buildings, claiming improved airflow and reduced energy costs. But the truth is, none of it is new. It's very, very old. You've been riding alongside that idea for miles now, and whether it landed in Paris or Punjab, Dubai, or Delphi, the core principle held, let the wind do what it does best. Historians still debate how much credit Persia deserves for spreading this architectural idea. Was it Persian genius or a broader desert-born intuition that showed up independently in similar climates? Some argue for a shared heritage, a common sense that arose in every place where the sun forgot how to quit. But you're not here for the fight, you're here for the breeze. And in this moment, it doesn't matter which architect drew which blueprint. What matters is that someone somewhere stood in the middle of a hot day, felt the air shift, and thought, what if we invited that in? You close your eyes again, your imaginary camel purring beneath you. Okay, maybe not purring, but you're feeling poetic and you feel it. The wind moving across centuries, across empires, across oceans, still finding ways to cool the human heart. Your journey has stretched across deserts and dynasties through tunnels of cool stone and whispering palms, all thanks to a marvel of passive design. But now you've arrived somewhere trickier, somewhere the breeze falters and the facts get tangled. You're now stepping into the hall of mirrors known as the scholarly debate. Because for all the bricks, vents, domes, and domed arguments, historians still can't quite agree on who first invented air conditioning in the ancient world, or even what invented means in this context. You sit on a shaded veranda sipping a chilled cup of barley water as two imagined historians pace in front of you. One is waving a stylus and a clay tablet. The other has a scroll tucked under one arm and an expression that says, I was born ready to disagree. They're reenacting an eternal academic duel. Who deserves the crown for inventing passive cooling? The Persian scholar steps forward, first confidently pointing to 3,000-year-old badgers still standing in Yazd. These are the oldest functional wind towers we have, they say. The Persians didn't just invent them, they perfected them, integrated them into homes, palaces, even underground irrigation systems. The opposing scholar from Mesopotamia taps their tablet. But earlier records show evidence of vented mud brick dwellings in ancient Assyria that suggest airflow control, wind directional layouts, early signs of controlled thermal environments. Then Egypt chimes in, because of course Egypt chimes in. Their ancient homes had high windows for cross ventilation, and desert tombs reveal surprisingly sophisticated passive temperature control. And let's not forget our deep, narrow alleyways, the Egyptian whispers smugly. Meanwhile, in the background, someone mumbles about the Indus Valley civilization. Their city planning had drainage and possibly evaporative features. We don't know exactly, but it looks suspiciously clever. You chuckle watching this academic tennis match unfold in your mind. Because here's the real twist, they're all probably right. Cooling technology may not have a single point of origin. Like firebread or the idea of naps, they seem to have emerged wherever humans grew tired of sweating through their sandals. But what Persia may have done better than anyone was scale it, systematize it, make it beautiful and functional and replicable across vast regions. And that, as your imaginary scholars reluctantly agree, is a different kind of genius. One of them grudgingly admits they wrote the instruction manual. Let's look at the language, shall we? The word badger, literally wine catcher, is elegant specific and has been preserved in architectural vocabulary to this day. Compare that to the more generic terms like vent chimney or air shaft. The Persian approach named the idea poetically, like it was taming a force of nature, not just making a hole in the wall. And while many civilizations experimented with evaporative cooling, damp claws, shaded pools, underground chambers, it was Persia that routinely combined all of these elements into a unified system. You could walk into a modest home in Yazd and find features that wouldn't look out of place in a royal residence. Cooling wasn't a class privilege, it was a cultural baseline. Still, the record is foggy. Many ancient cooling systems disappeared as newer technologies and newer conquerors swept in. Empires fell, architecture modernized, badgers were torn down in favor of air conditioners, and somewhere along the way a lot of credit got lost. There's one particularly quirky case. A colonial-era British officer visiting Iran in the 1800s marveled at a local merchant's natural wind trap, calling it a delightful exotic curiosity. He noted how it cooled the house without coal, without effort, and mused aloud if something similar might work back in India. Historians later discovered the officer's house had 2 badgers added to it within the year. No footnote about who taught him how. You walk now through a modern village on the edge of the desert. Some homes still feature badgers lovingly maintained by families who've resisted the lure of full electrification. Others have solar panels and sleek new fans. But it's clear that even modern designers are circling back. In one school, a hybrid badger HVAC system is being tested. It uses passive airflow for most of the day and only kicks in electric cooling when absolutely needed. The architect, a local woman in her 40s, says, "It's not nostalgia, it's just smarter." So maybe the argument isn't about who invented passive cooling. Maybe it's about who remembered it best. You sit on a rooftop now beside a quiet tower with 4 directional vents. It catches the breeze in every season. You feel the wind rise inside the shaft, scooping warm air out of the rooms below, inviting fresh air to wander in. You think about the people who designed the system not with apps or sensors, but with their bones. They knew the sun's angle by season. They knew the way stone absorbs silence. They knew how to turn a roof into an ally. And here's the truth no scholar can argue. It still works. The tower hums softly. A hawk glides in the distance. The tea beside you stays cool in its clay cup. And the wind, no matter where it first whispered, seems perfectly happy being Persian today. Evening settles across the rooftops of Yazd like a woven shawl pulled gently over your shoulders. The breeze, having fully returned, now roams freely from courtyard to corridor, moving through homes like a cat that owns the place. You are no longer wandering, you're resting. You've seen the domes and towers, tasted the chilled cucumbers, and walked beneath skylights pierced by wind. And now finally it's time to sleep. You lie on a rooftop terrace, yes, a roof again, because in ancient Persia rooftops were more than roofs. They were bedrooms. They were sanctuaries of cool air and starlight. On summer nights, families would drag out their bedding, set up mosquito nets, and fall asleep, under the sky lulled by the hum of night wind slipping through the badgers. Tonight you've been given the best spot near the parapet, where the wind brushes over the edge just softly enough to kiss your forehead. The bedding is simple, a thin cotton mattress over a mat of woven reeds, a pillow that smells faintly of lavender and sun. Your host has even placed a clay jar of cool water next to your resting place, the lid tied down with a scrap of cloth that's slightly damp for that extra nighttime chill. You lie back and look up. The stars begin their slow, ancient shimmer. There's no street noise, no blinking appliances. Just the breath of wind towers in every direction, drawing air up and out, letting new air wander in. Nearby, another family settles in. You hear murmured prayers, the squeak of a wooden ladder, and the giggle of a child being told gently to hush and sleep. The entire city seems to inhale together, then slowly exhale. The night has its own architecture, and that breeze you first noticed hours ago, it's still working, still winding through clay vents under domes across cool tiles, still brushing past basil pots and fig leaves, still running its secret errands from one room to the next. You think about everything you've passed, badgers, qanats, sardabs, yakuchals, domes that inhale heat in courtyards that reflect moonlight. 1,000 tiny tricks of survival stacked like bricks into a culture that understood heat, not as a punishment but as an invitation to build better. Somewhere a cat sneezes, somewhere else a rooftop curtain flutters, and above it all the wind continues to wander. Your eyes close, not suddenly, not completely, just enough to let the stars blur slightly. You feel the edges of the bedding cool beneath you, storing the breath of the night. There's a phrase in Persian poetry, Delam baratang shode, my heart has become narrow for you. But here tonight in this space designed for openness and air, your heart feels wide, spacious, sleep ready. The rooftop settles, the wind sings lullabies into the corners of your blanket, and slowly, like the sun slipping behind the desert hills, you drift. Now the city sleeps, its towers humming low like instruments tuned by moonlight. The air no longer rushes, it drifts, and so do you. Around you walls built from earth and water do what they've done for centuries, slow the night's breath, soften the heat that lingers, and hold space for your rest. These homes were not built for noise or flash. They were shaped for silence, for comfort, for sleep. Somewhere beneath the surface, the qanats still carry their quiet ribbons of water. They don't shout, they don't shine, they just flow gently, cooling the bones of the earth. And above, the stars look down on towers that never speak, but always listen, catching wind, guiding it, letting it move the air around your thoughts, letting it hush the hum of your day. You are still now. The bed beneath you does not move, but the air does, slowly, lovingly. It passes over your toes, past your cheeks, into your dreams, and in this ancient design, this world made from clay and sky, you belong. So take one last breath, let the coolness wrap around your fingers, let the breeze tuck you in, and let the old wisdom of walls, wind and water carry you gently into sleep.